My opinion may be different, but I need to trust that the wisdom of the Holy Spirit that has been manifested for more than 2 millennia has more value than my simple opinion. And then I surrender my intelligence.
I sometimes get myself in trouble when I use the word anti-intellectual to describe the Catholic Church. And I get it. I do. It's not a charitable phrasing. I'm still working on finding a better way to say it, one that's more charitable but still conveys the same general idea, because I think that the general idea is true. I think that the structure of the Catholic Church is such that it requires Catholics to be anti-intellectual. We just heard Father Acosta explain that requirement to be anti-intellectual in that clip that we just watched from Ascension Presents. And Father Acosta is not exactly a nobody. I mean, he's not the Pope or anything, but he did earn degrees in philosophy and education from a university in Venezuela, a Bachelor of Theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, a degree in Bible Science and Biblical Languages from the Pontifical Biblicum Institute in Rome, and a doctorate in Sacred Theology with a specialty in biblical studies from the Pontifical Gregorian University. That clip that we just watched, the video is called "Who Has the Authority to Interpret Scripture / the Bible?" Now, you may say, well, Kevin, Father said, my opinion. So he's not referring to like an informed decision based on scholarship, right? He's only referring to like, hey, when you have just an opinion, you should give the benefit of the doubt to tradition. But that's not what Father is saying. The clip that I showed starts at the 6-minute and 42-second mark, but now I would like to rewind and show you a clip that starts at the 6-minute and 20-second mark.
Wait a minute. Okay, my opinion may say this, my logic may say this, but now if I am doing this reading according with the spirit of the Catholic Church, I need also to see what the tradition says, what the magisterium says about that particular text.
So you can see here that what Father was really saying applies not only to your opinions, but to your logic as well. If you're a scholar, then presumably this applies to your scholarly logic. You may be beginning to see why I say that the church is anti-intellectual. That video from Ascension Presents is about the interpretation of the texts of the biblical canon. And so, for the rest of this video, I will seek to demonstrate how the church is anti-intellectual, specifically how the Biblical Pontifical Commission is anti-intellectual. Let's jump into it. In 1903, Pope Leo XIII promulgated Vigilantiae Studioque, an apostolic letter which formally established the Biblical Pontifical Commission, or BPC. This commission was to consist of several cardinals, and alongside them some non-cardinal advisors, but they will all report in to the Pope, who needs to approve each recommendation by this commission. Earlier in this letter, Pope Leo XIII points out that it has become, quote, almost customary to attack the scriptures from this source. Which source? From the common studies, and that is why, quote, it is expedient for their common studies to be aided and moderated by the auspices and guidance of the Apostolic See. So secular studies need guidance from Rome. This is the reason why Pope Leo XIII wanted to set up this commission of serious men, so that individual Catholics may be safe when they interpret Scripture. Safe, quote, not only from the impulse of error, but also from all rashness of opinion. This teaching will be, quote, healthy and uncorrupted. And this new commission would need to work hard to make sure that that way of thinking, referring to the common studies, quote, never grows strong among Catholics. For no Catholics can have those doubts. Regarding that language, you may think that Pope Leo XIII was saying that this commission was going to be infallible. Safe from any impulse of error sounds pretty strong. Maybe strong enough for the infallibility, at least of the ordinary magisterium? Perhaps even more importantly on the side of the people who want to argue for the authority of the writings of the Biblical Pontifical Association might be this letter from Pope St. Pius X, given in 1907. Leo XIII died later that same year of 1903 when he promulgated the study of vigilance. And then just a few years later, in 1907, Pope Pius X promulgated this letter. So I already have it translated into English. And if we scroll down here, we can see the highlighted portion here is what I would like to read. Therefore, we see that it must be declared and defined. This is a Latin page that was Google translated into English. So declared and enjoined, or declared and defined, as we declare at the present time and expressly define, that everyone is bound by the duty of conscience to the opinions of the Pontifical Council on biblical matters, whether those which have yet been issued or those which will hereafter be issued, in the same way as decrees of sacred congregations pertaining to doctrine and approved by the pontiff themselves submission. And it is not possible to avoid the mark of disobedient obedience and of rashness, or to be guilty of a serious offense, however many words and written sentences attack these kinds of things, and that apart from the offense by which they stumble, and the rest, in which they may be in cause before God, they are for the most part reckless in these erroneously pronounced by others. Okay, so what is that saying? We declare and define, says Pope Pius X. And if you recall, the we declare and define is supposed to be like infallible. So it seems like Pope Pius X is infallibly stating that all Catholics are bound by duty of conscience to the opinions of the PBC, to those that have been issued already and to those that are yet to be issued. You owe obedience to them the same way that you would owe your obedience to the sacred congregations. I think that's a reference to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or just kind of like the main body of the ordinary magisterium. So it seems to me like Pope Pius X is saying, we declare and define, aka I, Pope Pius X, am infallibly telling you that you owe your obedience to the PBC. That is pretty strong language. But is the PBC itself infallible? Despite all that strong language, I don't think that the clear opinion today, anyway, is that the commission is not infallible. This is the Catholic Encyclopedia. Now, this is not the Encyclopedia of 1917. The Encyclopedia of 1917 did not have an entry for the commission. But this is the modern encyclopedia published within the past few decades or whatever, not a century ago. And it does have an entry on the commission. So here's the entry on the commission. And if we scroll down, they actually have a entry on the authority of the decisions. And I would like to read this. The commission, though formed like a congregation, is not a congregation, but seemingly of lower rank. Its decisions are approved of the Pope and published by his command. Such approval, when given in forma communi, do not change the nature of the decisions as emanating from a congregation or commission, nor does it make them specifically pontifical acts. So they are not acts of the Pope. Much less does it imply an exercise of the Pope's personal prerogative of infallibility. Hence, the writings of the commission are not infallible nor unchangeable, though they must be received with obedience and interior assent, by which we judge that the doctrine proposed is safe and to be accepted because of the authority by which it is presented. These decisions are not the opinions of a private assembly, but an official directive norm. To question them publicly would be lacking in respect and obedience to legitimate authority. We are not hindered from private study of the reasons on which they are based, and if some scholar should find solid arguments against the decision, they should be set before the commission. And that's the end of the entry. Note, though, that you owe your obedience and interior assent. So, if you, a scholar, present your solid arguments against a decision that the commission may have made, or maybe even it's just you have a question about whether or not it's licit for you to come to a certain conclusion. And if you present them before the commission, and then if the commission makes a ruling, no matter what your position was before you asked the commission for the commission's opinion, you have to obey and assent interiorly to the decision that is judged and made by the commission. As a Catholic, that is what you must do. You must obey and assent to the commission, even though it's not infallible. Now that we have established that the commission is not infallible, I think that it's important that I lay out the scope for today's video essay. What is not in scope is proof that the Catholic Church is false or anything like that. Every single word written by the commission could be false, and that would not mean that the Catholic Church is necessarily not the one true church or something like that. The church never said, I declare and define that the commission is infallible in everything that it says about the Bible. Even though Pope Pius X kind of came close. He did say that he declares and defines that we all must owe our obedience and our assent to the commission. So with that being said, I think that even though this isn't a knockout punch or anything like that, I still think it's problematic. The teaching of the commission must be received with obedience and interior assent. The church just obligating her members to believe something that the church isn't willing to call infallible itself, to me, seems frankly cowardly. Obligating somebody to believe something, but then kind of leaving yourself a backdoor? Sorry? Why don't you just say, like, we think that this is the correct answer, and, we're pretty sure it's correct, but if your conscience is honestly telling you that we are wrong, then you have to follow your conscience. No, that is not what the church says, and I think that that's cowardly because the church is commanding you to do something that she won't do for herself. That's cowardly, in my opinion. And I think that's a problem in and of itself. However, there's potentially a bigger problem than just plain old the cowardice, and that is that the biblical commission has made a bunch of statements that I don't think that any modern Catholics hold to. Well, some do. The Kennedy Hall types, they definitely do. Let me show you what I mean. For the following 3 examples, plus 1 bonus example, I'm going to show you how the church obligates her members, non-infallibly obligates, but obligates nonetheless, her members to receive these 3 examples of the commission's teaching with obedience and interior assent, despite the fact that these findings are not at all in line with modern scholarship, and these findings have never been walked back. If you want to challenge me on the findings of modern scholarship, very well, go ahead. But I'm actually not going to back up modern scholarship in this video. This video is about the commission. It's not about the state of modern scholarship. What I will be doing, though, in this video is I will be showing a decision made by the commission, and I will also be showing the modern scholarly consensus, and I will be showing the conflict between the two. Then, knowing that the position that is in conflict with modern scholarship is the position that you, the Catholic, are obligated to, give your interior assent to, that is anti-intellectual. Because you are not allowed to kind of follow the scholarship no matter where the scholarship may lead. The strength of the arguments has nothing to do with it. Instead, it is strictly an appeal to authority, and that is anti-intellectual by definition. With that, let's jump into the examples. My first example of a problematic writing from the commission is going to come from 1907, when the commission published Author and Historical Truth of the Fourth Gospel, referring to the Gospel of John. You'll notice that all of the early writings of the commission are just written in like a doubt, answer, doubt, answer, doubt, answer format. not unlike, I mean, maybe inspired by the Summa or something like that. But regardless, we're going to look at doubts 1 and 3 from this document. Let's read doubt 1. Doubt 1 is written here, and it reads as follows. So this is quite long, so I'm going to try to just distill it down. You can read the whole thing. It is on the screen, but doubt 1 reads essentially something like this. Is it demonstrated with a sufficiently solid historical argument that the Apostle John and no other is to be recognized as the author of the fourth gospel? And the answer is yes. It is the case that that John is the author of the fourth gospel. You cannot doubt that. Catholics are not free to think that anybody besides John wrote John. And that is not in line with modern biblical scholarship. If you know me, you know that I love Father Raymond E. Brown, the author of An Introduction to the New Testament. And so I'm going to appeal to Father Brown to see where modern scholarship lies in terms of the Gospel of John. This comes from the section on the Gospel of John. I'm looking in particular at pages 368 into 369 in the section called Authorship and the Beloved Disciple. As with the other Gospels, it is doubted by most scholars that this Gospel was written by an eyewitness of the public ministry of Jesus. So, the 1907 writing of the Commission is not in line with the modern academic consensus. Let's take a look at doubt 3 as well. Doubt 3, it can be affirmed that the facts narrated in the fourth gospel are wholly or partly invented for that purpose, as if they were allegories or doctrinal symbols, and are the discourses of the Lord not truly and properly discourses of the Lord himself, but theological compositions of the writer, even if placed in the mouth of the Lord? No. You are not allowed to believe that any part of the Gospel of John is not truly history. And if you know anything about the Gospel of John, you probably know about the Pericope Adulterae. The Pericope Adulterae is a section, a pericope, of the Gospel of John, which records the story of the woman caught in adultery. It's the beautiful story, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, that whole thing. The only problem with that beautiful story is that it's not found in any of the earliest manuscripts. We know that it was added to the Gospel of John hundreds of years after the fact. That story is almost definitely just a folk tale about Jesus' life that was made up hundreds of years later and then eventually found its way into the Gospel. It is not original to the Gospel, and it probably didn't happen, historically speaking. That's fine. If you're able to derive theological significance out of that line, that's fantastic. But you're not allowed to affirm that the Pericope Adulterae was invented for any kind of allegorical or doctrinal purpose. And you have to believe that our Lord did truly say those words recorded in the Pericope Adulterae. But the problem with that is that that's not in line with the academic consensus. In this book, Contending with Christianity's Critics, you'll see it's by William Lane Craig and Paul Copan, but each chapter is written by somebody different. There's a chapter, and I'm going to go to page 154, and on page 154, you'll see, excuse me while I flip to it, but how badly did the early scribes corrupt the New Testament? And this is written by Daniel B. Wallace. Daniel B. Wallace is a conservative scholar of the New Testament. But take a look at this. The problem with problem passages. 3 of these passages have been considered inauthentic by most New Testament scholars, including most evangelical New Testament scholars, for well over a century. And those 3 are Mark 16, 9 through 20, the long ending of Mark, John 7:53 to 8:11, the Pericope Adulterae that we're talking about here, and 1 John 5, 7 to 8, that's the Johannine comma. So in a book written by, well, this chapter is by Daniel B. Wallace, but it's a book that has William Lane Craig's name on it and Paul Copan. They're admitting that most scholars, including most evangelical New Testament scholars, for over 100 years as of publishing, and this was published in 2009, so 100 years before this was pretty much exactly when the height of the commission was occurring, but they are admitting that this is just definitely not like original to the Gospel of John. But you are not allowed to think that the Pericope Adulterae was not original to the Gospel of John according to the commission. And that's anti-intellectual. The second example is going to be similar to the first in as much as it pertains to a book of the Bible, who wrote it, and things like that. But this, instead of the Gospel of John, is the book of Isaiah. This was published, this certain entry from the commission was written 1 year after the one from the Gospel of John, and you can see that it is written in that same kind of doubt and then response format. So we are going to read doubts 1 and 2 together, and then we're going to take a look at how that's not the consensus, and then we will do doubt 3 and take a look at how that's not the consensus. Okay, beginning with doubt 1. Can it be taught that the prophecies which are read in the book of Isaiah and in various passages of Scripture are not prophecies properly speaking, but are either narratives composed after the event, or that the prophet does not foresee the future by a supernatural revelation of God, but is by a happy accident or something? No, you cannot. So can it be taught that the prophecies in the book of Isaiah are not real prophecies? No, you cannot teach that. They must be real prophecies. Okay. And then doubt number 2 is the opinion which claims that Isaiah and the other prophets only uttered prophecies about imminent events or events that were about to happen within a short period of time. Are they compatible with the prophecies uttered by those same prophets, certainly a long time before the events? And is it compatible with the common opinion of the Holy Fathers who agree in affirming that the prophets also foretold events that were only to be fulfilled after many centuries? And the answer there is no. Let me read that again because I think it's kind of confusing. Is the opinion which claims that Isaiah only uttered prophecies that were to happen within a short period of time, is that compatible with the opinion of the Holy Fathers who agree in affirming that these prophecies were made a long time before the events? No. So you must believe that the prophecies told in Isaiah were legitimately written hundreds of years before those events happened. Again, and this is going to be a theme for essentially the rest of the video, that is not what the scholarly consensus is today. We're going to take a look at An Introduction to the Old Testament, the Canon in Christian Imagination by Walter Brueggemann, written in 2003. We're going to go to page 160, which is in a section on the book of Isaiah. In the long book of Isaiah, however, the actual words from the 8th century prophet are judged by scholars to be relatively few. No critical scholar, moreover, believes that the book as a whole is authored by the 8th century prophet. Rather, the book of Isaiah, while rooted in the person of Isaiah, has emerged only through a long, extensive, and complex traditioning process, perhaps through a continuous succession of disciples of Isaiah who continue to articulate the general interpretive trajectory of the person of Isaiah, but who in fact were themselves powerful interpreters capable of generating new articulations. To some extent, the literature of the book of Isaiah is simply a continued meditation upon the destiny of Jerusalem, the meditation that occurred in something like separated random acts of responsiveness to the new issues of faith and circumstances at the same time. However, it is clear that the final form of the text has some rough intentionality that gives the whole book a suggestive coherence. And then he says that once the notion of authorship of the 8th century prophet is given up, as it is for most interpreters, critical scholarship for over a century has held to the view that the book of Isaiah is constituted into 3 quite distinct parts that reflect different historical circumstances, different modes of literary articulation, and consequently different theological vistas. That is not at all compatible with the statement from the commission that it can be taught that the prophecies which are read in the book of Isaiah are composed after the event, when that is almost certainly the case. That is the opinion of the majority of critical scholars. But Catholics are not allowed to agree with the majority of critical scholars, no matter how good the evidence may be. Let's then go look at doubt 3. Doubt 3. Can it be admitted that chapters 44 to 46 cannot have for its author Isaiah himself, long dead, but it must be attributed to some unknown prophet who lived among the exiles? So again, I'm kind of trying to distill this for you because it's difficult to read, but can it be admitted that chapters 40 to 66 cannot have Isaiah himself as the author? No. Catholics cannot admit that chapters 40 to 66 are written by somebody different than who wrote everything before that. Chapters 40 to 66 have to be written by the same person who wrote the preceding chapters. And again, that is not in line with the scholarly consensus. Turning back to an introduction to the Old Testament by Brueggemann, we are looking at page 166. This developing tradition of anticipated well-being prepares the way for Second Isaiah, also termed Deutero-Isaiah, the middle portion of the book of Isaiah in chapters 40 to 55. It is a long-held view of scholarship that these chapters constitute a quite distinct tradition. Different in literary style and genre, wherein this text is much more lyrical in its articulation than in First Isaiah. Different in historical circumstance, as this text is preoccupied with the fall of Babylon and the rise of Cyrus the Persian. And different in theological vista, as this text moves divisively towards monotheism, voicing the God of Israel as the sole God and the creator of heaven and earth. The scholarly title Second Isaiah recognizes that this material in the book of Isaiah, and perhaps is connected to First Isaiah. The title also asserts by second, however, that this is very different material addressed in the word Yahweh to Israel in a very different circumstance. Further on, right at the bottom of the page, it says that this text is conventionally dated to 540 BC. Compare 540 BC to the date given on page 161, which is the 8th century. Right here on page 161, the critical consensus that before chapter 39, so in chapters 1 through 39, were written somewhere in the period of 742 to 701. That's the 8th century BCE. And again, compare roughly 700 to 740 to around the year 540 on page 166. Right here, this text is conventionally dated to 540. That's a 200-year difference. But the Catholic is obligated to believe that the same person who wrote First Isaiah in the 8th century BC is the same person who wrote Second Isaiah, or Deutero-Isaiah, in the 6th century, 200 years later. You must ignore the scholarly consensus. Don't worry about the arguments. You must believe what the Commission has laid out all the way back in 1908, and that is anti-intellectual. The third and final example for today's video are some questions regarding the pastoral letters of the Apostle Paul. This writing of the Commission was written on June 12th, 1913, so a few years later. And in this article is titled Author, Integrity, and Time of Composition of the Pastoral Letters of the Apostle Paul. Again, written in that same kind of doubt and then answer format, although maybe this is more of like a question and answer format. But we're going to read doubts 1, 2, and 4, and then we're going to take a look back at Father Raymond E. Brown's An Introduction to the New Testament. Doubt 1. Must it be held, and let's find that, must it be held as certain that the so-called pastoral letters, namely the 2 to Timothy and 1 to Titus, were written by the Apostle Paul himself and have always been numbered among the authentic and canonical letters? Yes. It must be held as certain that the pastorals were written by Paul. Can one maintain that the pastoral letters were composed and notably augmented by unknown authors of the later period with fragments of letters or with lost Pauline letters? No. No. It has to be written by Paul himself. They cannot be written by like students of Paul who like were working off of Paul's letters or something. No. And then number 4. Can it be affirmed with certainty that the pastoral letters were written in the lapse of time which elapsed between the liberation from the first imprisonment and then the death of Paul the Apostle? Yes. And, I mean, I think you know the drill by now. Where does scholarship stand today? Again, we're going to go to Father Raymond D. Brown's An Introduction to the New Testament, and we're going to take a look at page 668. This is in his section on the pastoral 1 Timothy. In varying ways, the factors just listed have contributed to a situation where about 80 to 90% of modern scholars would agree that the pastorals were written after Paul's lifetime. And of those, the majority would accept the period between 80 and 100 as the most plausible context for their composition. So Doubt 4 specifically says that they have to be written sometime in like the 60s, because Paul died in the 60s and he was imprisoned in the like early 60s. So sometime in the mid 60s is when those have to be written. That's what Doubt 4 said. And right here, about 80 to 90% said they were written between not in the 60s, but in the 80s, 90s, or 100s. Doubt 2 was, could somebody else have written them, like one of Paul's disciples? And Doubt 1 was, must it be held as certain that Paul wrote them? And it was no to Doubt 2 and yes to Doubt 1. But again, 80 to 90% of scholars disagree with Doubts 1 and 2 and 4 from this third example, from the questions regarding the pastoral letters of the Apostle Paul written by the congregation, by the committee on June 12th, 1913. I mean, that was 30 years ago, too, that this was written. 27 years ago that this book was written, that 80 to 90% of scholars would agree. I think that today that number is probably only higher. It seems to me to be universally agreed by all critical scholars that the pastorals weren't written by Paul. And again, I'm not defending the critical consensus here. I'm just saying that that is the critical consensus, and that no matter what the arguments are, the arguments really don't matter. You as a Catholic are obligated to just accept what the commission has said and to ignore the arguments presented by critical scholars. Your intellect needs to be surrendered here. Your opinion, your logic, quoting Father Acosta, does not matter. You need to surrender your intellect to the commission. And that is, by definition, anti-intellectual. I like to think that I've made my point here. So now I think it's the time in the video essay where I turn to like potential defeaters and rebuttals and things like that. And to aid myself in writing this script, I wrote up essentially everything that I've presented up until this point. I wrote that up and I posted it to Reddit, to a debate Catholicism type subreddit, hoping to get some responses. And sure enough, I did. And there was one thing that actually kind of made me question whether this argument still works. I still think it does work, which is why I've made this video. But I would like to kind of present what I consider like the best, I guess, rebuttal to this whole argument is going to be something like this. Okay, so let me share. This is that Reddit post that I was talking about. And this user, who's, I'm not going to just say that string of stuff, but he posted this. So something called Early Decrees of the Commission, the Pontifical Biblical Commission. And it's from the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. So if we go down a little while, we'll find here Early Decrees of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. Decrees issued between 1905 and 1915 and in 1933 are summarized briefly below. This is a difficult task because the decrees were issued in the form of response to intricate questions, often phrased negatively. Many now have little more than historic interest, being implicitly revoked by later decrees, by DAS, I'm not really sure what that is, and by Vatican II. They must be evaluated according to the 1955 clarification issued in Latin and in German by A. Miller and by A. Kleintons, Secretary and Assistant Secretary of the PBC. Miller says, as long as these early PBC decrees propose views that are neither immediately nor immediately connected with the truths of faith and morals, the interpreter of sacred scripture can pursue his scientific investigations with full liberty and accept the results of these investigations, provided always that he respects the teaching authority of the church. The author here goes on to say that ultra-conservatives have attempted to salvage the authority of the early commission decrees by citing the opinion of Steinmuller, that this clarification was unauthorized and invalid because he heard that Miller and so he keeps going. But so apparently the secretary, so the head of the committee, apparently in 1955 wrote a letter that says, hey guys, all the earlier stuff you don't have to pay attention to anymore. If that were true, I would think that this would pose a pretty significant problem for my argument today. But I don't think it's quite as powerful as the author of this entry in the commentary of the New Jerome Bible is making it seem. First of all, who is this author? Well, it's actually Father Raymond D. Brown, the same guy who wrote the quote, that an introduction to the New Testament, which I was using as a source for both my first and third examples. But so it seems to me like Father Raymond Brown is of the opinion that the early committee decisions, the ones that I'm calling anti-intellectual and problematic, Father Brown is just not really concerned about them. He says that now it doesn't matter too much. I think it kind of does matter, and let me tell you why. So first, we can actually just read this part here. As long as these early committee decrees propose views that are neither immediately nor immediately connected with the truths of faith and morals, the interpreter of sacred scripture can pursue his scientific investigations with full liberty and accept the results of these investigations, provided always that he respects the teaching authority of the church. Yes, exactly. That's what we've been saying the whole time. And the teaching authority of the church has spoken. The committee has spoken, right? Like that's right, as long as you respect the teaching authority of the church. To me, that doesn't change anything about the committee, right? Like you owe your assent and your obedience to the committee, and the committee has ruled, and that's that. So I don't understand how this 1955 letter written by the secretary of the commission that ends with, as long as you respect the teaching authority of the commission, I don't think that changes anything. And worse, so let's check out one of those. Father Brown referred to like an ultra-conservative group. Well, so here's one of those this is the Colby Center for the Study of Creation. These are the young earth geocentrists guys. And well, they have an article here where they talk about so they're even quoting Father Brown here, where they're talking, in the Jerome Biblical Commentary, saying that many of the decrees of the PBC have little more than historic interest, being implicitly revoked by later decrees, including that recent clarification letter. Well, here is that recent clarification letter, but guess what? This clarification letter was actually not written like by the committee. If you take a look at the list on the Vatican website of all of the publications of the committee, this clarification letter is not there. It was never officially promulgated by the committee. It was never signed off on by the Pope, nothing like that. Where was this actually published? Well, it was printed first in a German biblical periodical, and I'm not going to try to say that, but it's right here, the highlight right here. It was first published in there, and then it was later printed in other journals like the Catholic Biblical Quarterly. But who cares? Who cares if it's published in like the Catholic Biblical Quarterly? Like, that's no more binding on the conscience of the Catholic than like Nature magazine or like a journal published by like the American Association of Chemical Engineers. like it's not an actual arm of the Vatican or anything like that. So who cares? So first of all, this thing doesn't even, it says that you have to still obey the committee. And so, yeah, that's right. And it wasn't even published officially by the committee. Sure, it was written by the secretary of the committee, but I don't find this to be something that revokes anything that the council said, especially when Pope Pius declared and decreed that all of the rulings of the committee, past and present, are to be obeyed. Like, that's Like something published in the Catholic Biblical Quarterly versus Pope Pius X saying we declare and decree. To me, it's not hard to figure out which one has more authority. Also, though, in the commentary, Father Brown says that the earlier decrees of the PBC were implicitly revoked by later decrees, by Divino Afflante Spiritu and by Vatican II. I have no idea what an implicit revoking would look like. As in, yeah, guys, it's implied. Don't worry. We declare and decree versus, no, it's an implicit revoking of an infallible. What? I don't know. That to me just seems like super wishy-washy. It seems like somebody's trying to protect somebody's trying to erase the past mistakes of the church. And so I don't find the 1955 clarification letter to be a convincing reason why Catholics are no longer bound to the earlier decrees by the PBC. I think they're wrong, right? I think that the early decrees of the PBC are wrong. But just because they're wrong, I don't think that actually changes anything. And I think that the Catholic is still obligated to believe them. Because they've never been officially, the church has never said, yeah, guys, we were wrong. We were wrong back then. The church hasn't said that. And I think the church hasn't said that because nobody wants to admit that they're wrong, right? But that's kind of my take on the situation. I would love to get pushback from you guys on that, on this in particular, on the implicit reversal of the earlier decrees of the committee. I would love if one of you guys is more educated on this than I am, please let me know in the description down below. And that's where I better officially end this video. This has been a really long, kind of technical one. I probably bored most of you to death. But I think I want to end with the conclusion being, so what's the point of all this? Well, partially, I want to let people know what I'm talking about when I talk about the anti-intellectual nature of the Catholic Church. I don't say it to be mean, right? I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to call anybody, anti-intellectual does not mean stupid or dumb or anything like that. Anti-intellectual means that you are purposefully surrendering your intellect. I don't think that's a good thing to do. Catholics do think that that's a good thing to do. Catholics, by and large, would say obedience is a good thing, and giving assent of the intellect to the proper authority is right on. That's what Catholics do, and I know that's what Catholics do. I think it's anti-intellectual, particularly because those authorities can be wrong. The track record here is not, it's not very good. I don't think it's anti-intellectual when somebody says, I don't understand how physics works, so I'm going to just kind of take the physicist at his word. I don't understand medicine, so I'm going to take the doctor at his word. I don't think that's anti-intellectual. I don't. What I do think is anti-intellectual, though, is being forced, under pain of sin, to accept the teachings of the Catholic Church, especially when those teachings fly in the face of modern scholarship, especially when the church has not officially repealed. And I get it. Somebody else on Reddit was telling me that this is kind of saying, you're critiquing the state of, and I'm going to make this up, but you're critiquing the state of Kentucky because there's technically still a law in the books that says it's illegal to, hold 2 ice cream cones in both of your hands on a Sunday or something. Okay. If that law was in place, even if it wasn't being enforced, I would say, yeah, we should probably get rid of that law, right? Just so that it's not abused in the future or anything like that. But secondly, I don't think that you can just draw an analogy, because it's true that the church doesn't enforce the early decrees of the PBC anymore. The modern Vatican is not telling people that they still must reject the idea that, Deutero-Isaiah is a separate work from First Isaiah. No, the church is not making that argument. Not anymore. So in a sense, it's true that these are requirements that are simply not enforced. But the poor catechesis of the main body of Catholics isn't an excuse for the Catholic clergy to be lazy about remove it because it's there. It's a sin, right? Like, potentially a big sin if somebody knows about these requirements and just doesn't care, and you know about them now because you've watched this video. So if you're a Catholic and you watch this video and if you're convinced by my arguments that, like, these requirements still do stand, and you believe that Deutero Isaiah is like a real thing, you're sinning. You're disobeying. Pope Pius X declared and decreed that you owe your obedience to the committee. And if you're going to disobey that, like, I guess do so at your own peril. I don't know. Clearly, I don't think that they're right. But that's because I'm kind of looking at the whole Catholic organization. I'm like, no, clearly, like, look, it's not just those 3 mistakes that I issued today. It's all these other mistakes have just led me to believe that, that organization is not the organization that I once thought that it was. Even though definitely what I'm arguing today doesn't lead you to that conclusion, right? Maybe it's part of like a, it's one little chip on the scale, sure. But I don't think that just this one argument alone, like I said at the beginning, it's not a knockout punch. But my point is that I think that this is problematic, even though it's not enforced anymore, because it appears to me like it's still a sin, even though it's not enforced anymore. And if the church is creating additional ways in which people can sin, then they're just putting barriers towards salvation. And like, would the one true church put up barriers towards our salvation? I would think not, but I don't know. I'm not Catholic anymore, so maybe I should let you guys tell me whether or not the one true church would do that. Maybe I got this whole thing wrong. Maybe you guys just have some information that I don't have, and if you do, I would love to hear it in the description down below. So thanks so much for hanging out with me. Jeez, it's been like, 45 minutes or something by now? Something crazy? Whatever. Thanks so much for hanging out, and until next time.